So we're actually going to read 2 chapters today from part 3. The last time we finished the healthy choice, part 3 is breaking down the barriers. We're up to chapter 7, how psychological barriers influence us. When I was a child, oh wait, one sec, I'll move my microphone closer. When I was a child, one of my favorite films was Chicken Run, an animation about a group of chickens living on an egg farm who are desperate to escape as the farmers are going to kill them and put them in a pie. I would root for these poor animals and hope they managed to evade the evil farmers, while simultaneously hoping that I was going to have chicken nuggets for dinner. It is ironic that so many films and TV shows for kids feature the animals that we farm and kill by the billions. Peppa Pig is a well-known example, as is Shaun the Sheep, both beloved by children. Parents would be understandably outraged if Peppa was forced into a gas chamber in one episode, or Shaun had his throat cut. And yet, most parents are paying for those things to happen to real animals and feeding them to their children, who probably aren't even aware that the sausages they had for dinner came from a pig. As children, our views of animals are very different to those we have as we grow older. Children don't evaluate the lives of animals based on what they do for us, or what we can take from them. Instead, they value them simply because of their existence. A young child doesn't think it's wrong to hurt a dog because we culturally keep dogs as pets, but as they grow older, that's what we teach them to believe. Likewise, in some areas of the world, children are taught that it's wrong to kill a cow. Essentially, as we grow older, we are taught that some animals have little intrinsic value beyond what they can provide for us. This is so heavily shaped by culture and historical precedents, as opposed to any objective and indisputable facts, that these taught values require us to create rationalizations and defenses to justify what we do to certain animals. A piglet makes us smile in the same way as a puppy. A little lamb is as cute as a kitten. We even take our children to petting zoos and open farms so that they can bottle feed baby animals because it makes them and us happy. However, the child doesn't know, and the parent might not realize, that the child is fattening up the animal to be slaughtered. Not long before I became vegan, I went to a small farm that was open to the public. I remember standing with one of the young farmers next to a pig pen, throwing food into it. The farmer told me that he was really happy because he had passed his driving test and was now able to drive the pigs to the slaughterhouse himself. I suddenly realized that I was fattening up the pigs for slaughter, and I was shocked by the farmer's excitement at being able to drive them to their death in the coming weeks. The happiness these pigs were providing me turned to guilt. These pigs thought they were being cared for, and the smiles and laughter of those who came to visit them most likely assured them that they were safe. But they weren't. Far from it. It would be heartbreaking for most children if they were told that the little lamb they were feeding was in a matter of months going to be slaughtered. And imagine if the farmer tried to slaughter the animal right there in front of everyone. The child would be traumatized. But then again, so would most of us. If we saw a chick being thrown into a macerator, we would be devastated. If we saw a piglet being mutilated, we would be deeply upset. If a farmer attempted to kill an animal in front of us, many of us would try to stop them. Yet these things happen every day, and we pay for them to happen. We don't think about it. We choose not to think about it. because it is out of sight and out of mind. We form deep psychological defense mechanisms as we grow older, and these industries are able to make great profits doing things we would try to stop if they were happening in our presence. To illustrate my point, let's say the next time you are out walking, you see someone attacking a dog with the intention of killing them. What do? Do you try to intervene? Do you call the police? Do you try to save the dog's life? What if instead of a dog, the animal being attacked and killed in front of you was a pig? Do you still try to save their life? Now, let's say you are walking home and a pig is being attacked and killed, except it's not happening in front of you, but is instead taking place in a room in a building we call a slaughterhouse. Does that remove the need for you to intervene? Is unnecessary killing of a pig always wrong, or just when it's happening right in front of you? Acknowledging the individual. One of the most significant demonstrations of this attitude in practice is how we react when animals escape slaughter. In 2019, a cow affectionately named Daisy by people online escaped from a slaughterhouse in Carlisle, England. Daisy ran into a nearby cul-de-sac and prompted a huge outcry from people wishing for her to be rescued, even though she was running away from a fate that is determined by the actions of many of these people, most of whom would happily have eaten her had she not escaped. The police ended up shooting Daisy and killing her, leading to public condemnation. This story reveals so much about how we view animals and their slaughter. The fact that we yearn for escaped animals to live speaks volumes about how we value their lives once they become separated from the anonymous herd. We then acknowledge that they are individuals, with their own personalities and a clear desire to live. We recognize that there is something they are trying to escape from, that they are fearful and in a situation they do not want to be in, which is so troubling that they would rather take the risk of running into the unknown than allow what is happening to them to continue. In essence, we view these animals as underdogs, heroes overcoming adversity, and yet the adversity they are trying to overcome is us. They're only there because of the choices that we make. These animals are not simply escaping the slaughterhouse or trying to evade the police. They are running from us, the people who have decided their fate long before they were born. It may be the slaughterer's knife or a police officer's bullet that physically kills the animals, but their deaths are on all our hands. This is another reason why animals who escape slaughter make such an impact on us. They defy the perceptions that we have of them. They display sentience and emotion and expose our preconception that they are unintelligent, biological machines who have no idea what's happening to them and don't really care, as false. The problem is, we then view that one animal as being special. We determine that they deserve life because they're not like all the other animals. However, there is no reason why that animal is more deserving of life. It's just that our perception of them has changed. Another revealing aspect of stories like this one is the idea that animals must fight for their freedom and earn the right to live. However, it shouldn't be the case that just because others are unable to make a break for freedom, their deaths become more justifiable as a result. We don't apply this standard to other situations of animal suffering, such as dogs being farmed in Southeast Asia. We would never say that only the ones who are able to escape shouldn't be killed. These examples reveal one of the main ways in which we psychologically excuse what we do to animals. Just as the dog and pig thought experiment showed us we would feel responsible for an animal being hurt or killed in front of us, Seeing animals escape and become publicly visible creates a similar sense of culpability. On some level, whether consciously for some or unconsciously for others, we understand our role in what is happening and feel guilty as a result. Basically, the animal suffering is no longer out of sight and out of mind, as it is normally. When we are not directly confronted with what happens to millions of animals every day, we can psychologically distance ourselves from it. The aphorism, "If slaughterhouses had glass walls, we'd all be vegetarian," expresses a significant idea. We are so detached from what happens that we never think about it. We buy a steak in a supermarket, but never stop to consider the cow who has been killed. We buy a bacon sandwich, but never think about the pig in the gas chamber. We are removed from the process and therefore able to absolve ourselves of any responsibility. Ignorance, after all, is bliss. This is exactly how the animal product industries want us to feel, and why they are shrouded in secrecy. There are even laws in the USA, Australia, and Canada known as ag-gag laws, which make it illegal to film farms and slaughterhouses. If an investigator or journalist from Iowa, for example, went onto a farm and secretly filmed an animal being abused in an illegal way, they could be jailed for 2 years, which is the same sentence that a person caught abusing the animal could receive. In the UK, in late 2019, a farm part owned by the deputy president of the NFU at that time was exposed for illegal treatment of animals, including beatings and sexual abuse. In response, a spokesperson for the farm stated, "Trespassers entered our farm unlawfully and secretly filmed many hours of footage. We regard this as a gross breach of privacy and absolutely condemn it." There is such reluctance to acknowledge what happens in farms and slaughterhouses that even though the investigation was not illegal and exposed great wrongdoing, the industry was keener to condemn the investigation than what had been exposed. These kinds of responses are, of course, attempts to deflect blame from what is happening to the animals and undermine the investigations. But I also think there is something less obvious going on as well, something that in turn points to a wider problem related to farming and indeed animal product consumption more generally. Revealing our dissonance, from UFOs to firefighters. Cognitive dissonance is a psychological concept that was identified by Leon Festinger in the 1950s. It is described as the psychological stress that occurs when a person's beliefs, values, or ideas contradict or go against an action or behavior that they are engaged in. The concept came from a study of a cult in Chicago that believed a UFO was going to rescue them from a cataclysmic event due to cause huge destruction across the world. When the event didn't happen and a UFO didn't come to save them, the followers of the cult convinced themselves that it was going to happen a few days later. When the next predicted day came and went, the followers were forced to confront the dissonance that they were experiencing. Many members of the group returned home and recognized the falsity of what they had believed. However, others declared that their faith had saved the world from the event. The aliens were no longer coming to rescue them because they had stopped the disaster from taking place. Dissonance becomes most evident when it threatens our belief that we are kind, ethical, and competent. And as seen in this case study, when someone is confronted with dissonance, they have two choices. They can either change their behavior or attempt to justify it. While this was a blatant form of cognitive dissonance in action, There are more subtle and societally accepted instances. For example, our desire for cheap clothes contradicts our shared value of being against human exploitation. And in the case of what we do to animals, our desire to eat animal products contradicts our being against animal cruelty. When farmers' malpractices are exposed, this undermines their beliefs that they are kind and ethical, and they must either accept the truth or justify why they are not in the wrong, such as claiming that those responsible for the investigation are acting illegally. As consumers, our cognitive dissonance means we often believe these are just bad apples, that they don't represent the industry as a whole and don't reveal a systemic problem. And yet, by this point, there have surely been enough bad apples to suggest that the whole tree is rotten. Another good example of the cognitive dissonance of consumers is demonstrated by the story of a man in Florida who pleaded guilty to 9 animal cruelty charges for killing 9 ducklings by running them over with a lawnmower and macerating them. He was sentenced to a year in jail, with 3 years of probation, and was ordered to have a mental health evaluation. However, is it not jarring that macerating 9 ducklings constitutes 9 separate charges of animal cruelty, but killing 7 billion male chicks every single year as soon as they are born, often by macerating them in grinders, is not only viewed as acceptable, but is often defended by people who claim that it is those who do not believe in killing male chicks who are extreme. How can it be wrong to kill 9 ducklings, but not billions of male chicks, especially considering both acts are ultimately needless? This example demonstrates an obvious contradiction, which speaks to the wider issue of our cognitive dissonance in relation to animal product consumption. The reality is that if we took the legally sanctioned practices from the animal farming industries and then applied them to other situations, we would think those practices horrendous. For example, if dog owners were cutting off their pets' tails and chopping their teeth out, we would condemn that as being horrific animal abuse. But we do it to pigs and call it high welfare. If someone was killing puppies by thumping their heads against a wall or dislocating their necks, we would call that evil. Yet that happens to animals such as piglets and chickens, and we call it humane. But the experience is the same for the individual animal, regardless of what species they are. In another example, firefighters in the UK rescued 18 piglets and 2 breeding sows from a farm barn that had caught fire. The farmer who owned the pigs later had them slaughtered and turned into sausages, which he then gave to the firefighters as a thank you for rescuing them. The firefighters said, "We can tell no porkies, the sausages were fantastic." Well, the fact that the firefighters rescued the pigs in the first place shows that they have compassion and empathy for animals. If they had not done so, it would have been considered incredibly immoral. Vegans were upset that the firefighters ate the pigs, but there would have been condemnation from non-vegans and vegans alike if the firefighters had actively chosen to let the pigs burn. However, the suffering of the animals in a barn fire and the suffering in a slaughterhouse are equally as unwanted and just as likely to cause pain. So, why do we consider it right to save animals from unnecessary suffering in one situation, but not in another, when they would wish to be saved in either case? Re-evaluating our understanding of animals. Another major way in which we devalue the intelligence of farmed animals, and thereby psychologically justify our treatment of them, is by viewing them as all being the same. One of the reasons for this is that we have bred them to be genetically similar, which further plays into the idea that they are just a collective mass that lack any significant or meaningful individuality. When we remove characteristics or traits that would make it easier to see them as individuals, we instead view them as a mass of interchangeable things. Fish are, of course, the ultimate abstraction. Thousands of species all categorized as if they are merely one. We remove all individualism from them. And even with all the scientific evidence that supports the fact they feel pain, we still treat them as if they are nothing more than inanimate ocean objects. Perpetuating the idea that animals aren't individuals or worthy of any regard allows us to characterize them in a way that suits our desire to eat them. This is why we refer to pigs as being dirty and chickens as being stupid. These characterizations further reinforce the idea that non-human animals are not morally relevant, and it is therefore acceptable to cause harm, because they are cognitively inferior. Interestingly, in one study, undergraduate students were asked to fill out a survey ranking the traits of chickens, such as their intelligence, their capacity to feel, and their individual personalities. Afterwards, the students had a practical class with live chickens, where they used positive reinforcement to teach the chickens tricks. They were then asked to do the same survey again, and the students rated the intelligence and presence of individual personalities in chickens more highly this time round. In their written feedback, students included statements like, "Interesting that chickens are a lot smarter than I originally thought." The fact that the students ranked the chickens low to begin with speaks volumes about our initial perception of these animals. We essentially think of them as being dissimilar to us, and even accuse people who say that animals have emotions of anthropomorphizing them, or criticize those who say that animals value their lives, mourn being separated from their babies, or don't want to die, as if it were only humans who can experience emotions and desire. The obvious reality is that if we acknowledged that animals are capable of these emotions and feelings, we would struggle to diminish their worth to the point whereby doing everything that we do to them becomes morally acceptable. A report that the UK was considering banning the importation of foie gras prompted the director of the Industries Association, the Comité Interprofessionnel des Palmipèdes à Foie Gras, to state that there is a problem of judgments based on anthropomorphic perceptions that the animal used in the production is suffering. People have to stop imagining a tube being inserted in their throat because a duck and a goose's throat is nothing like yours. It's no wonder this position is taken by the industry, as they confine animals in cages, force feed them twice a day so that their livers grow to 7 to 10 times their normal size, and then cut their throats. Not to mention that studies have shown that force-fed birds have mortality rates 10 to 20 times higher than non-force-fed birds. So it's hardly surprising that the industry feels the need to discredit the suffering of these animals, because if they viewed what they were doing objectively, they would either have to leave the industry and their livelihoods, or spend every day consciously causing horrendous, needless suffering. Ignorance is bliss, even when it's willful. However, sometimes farmers react differently. One sheep farmer who had been in the animal farming industry for 47 years decided he couldn't live with taking his animals to slaughterhouse anymore, and drove his lambs to an animal sanctuary instead. He also stopped eating meat at the same time, and switched to farming vegetables, allowing the cattle he already had to live out the rest of their lives with him on the farm. In another example, a dairy farmer interviewed on a BBC program called The Dark Side of Dairy broke down when asked about the process of separating calves from their mothers, saying that there were mother cows who would bawl for days. No doubt many other dairy farmers would accuse him of anthropomorphizing cows. Someone, not something. There are a number of further ways in which we attempt to distance ourselves from what happens to animals, and one of those is through our use of language. A common term used to describe animals who we farm is livestock. By referring to them as livestock, we create a distinction between farm animals and the others that exist in the world. It essentially otherizes the animals we exploit and places them in a different classification, which in turn further perpetuates the idea that it's acceptable to use and kill them. The word livestock further commodifies these animals, as we literally classify them as being stock, as for a shelf, a product that we can trade and profit from. But, of course, there's no difference between the animals we call livestock and the animals we don't accept. And the animals we don't accept our perception of them. Livestock only comes as a plural. It forces us to see the animals as a group rather than identifying with the individual. To see them as being a something rather than a someone. You might have also noticed that I very deliberately refer to animals as he, she, they, or who, rather than it or that. Animals are not inanimate objects. They are living beings, and the language we use to describe them is important. This concept of categorizing animals allows our values to fluctuate, especially considering that the number of animals we deem to be food is an incredibly small fraction of all the edible animals that exist. A fascinating example of this was the scandal in Europe in 2013, when many beef products, such as burgers and lasagnas, were found to contain horse meat. People in the UK were outraged that they were consuming horses and not cattle, although morally there's no difference. Horse meat is widely consumed across many areas of Europe, tastes similar to cattle flesh, and even has twice as much iron as steak from a cow. And the UK is one of the biggest horse racing nations in the world, with many horses dying on the track each year, often with a black curtain pulled around them so that they can be shot out of sight. Hundreds of racehorses are slaughtered and often exported to places in Europe where they will be eaten. So, by British standards, it's acceptable to shoot a horse on a racetrack. It's even acceptable to kill them in a slaughterhouse, but eating them is immoral and scandalous. The species of animals we consider to be food animals have changed over time. Up until the 1930s, people in the UK did eat horse meat. In the 1950s, whale meat was available to buy in the UK and was called wacon, which the UK government recommended for its high nutritional value. After the Second World War, whale meat was even off ration, meaning it could be distributed without restriction. Today, most British people would balk at the idea of eating horse or whale flesh. An argument that is often used to justify eating the animals we do is that we have eaten them for millennia. But the same is also true of dog meat, with dogs being consumed in Germany in the early 20th century, and they are still consumed in rural areas of Switzerland. Incidentally, dog meat is high in protein and iron. It too can contain more than beef, an argument that is often used to justify consuming animal flesh, for its nutritional value. I can't imagine that dog lovers across the UK would be happy with someone cutting a dog's throat because their flesh is a good source of iron and protein. Yet, self-professed animal lovers can pay for a cow's throat to be cut and defend that action with the same logic. The problem is that once an animal is classified as being food, the way we think about that animal's attributes changes. This is why the fact that cattle flesh is high in protein is used as a justification for what we do to them, yet the fact that dogs, cats, whales, and many other edible animals are also high in protein doesn't make us feel differently about consuming them. Imagine how people would react if someone bred dogs into existence, gave them 6 months of life, and then cut their throats with the justification, "I gave them a good life. I cut their throat humanely. I like how they taste, and they're a good source of essential nutrients, such as protein and zinc. Besides, people have been eating dogs for thousands of years, and it's not right for you to force your views on me." It's interesting that millions of people sign petitions condemning dog meat consumption in Asia, but if a vegan questions their consumption of other animals, the vegan is forcing their views on them. Processing fact from fiction. It's not just the word livestock that distances us from what is happening to animals. The animal agriculture industries constantly use euphemisms to try to mask what is really happening. For example, I was having a conversation with a farmer who told me that they don't use the word slaughter anymore, and instead say that the animals are harvested and then processed. In fact, in 2019, at the New South Wales Annual Farming Conference, farmers voted for the word slaughter to be completely removed from their promotional material and replaced with the word processed, as they believed that the former was too emotive and undermined people's trust in animal farming. One animal farmer in attendance said, "The word slaughter is not appropriate for our industry." This hypocrisy is also demonstrated by what many animal products are called, with some named in such a way that we are disconnected from the reality of who we are eating. Even though the origins of many of these words can be traced back hundreds of years, it's interesting to note that referring to animal flesh as meat, pig flesh as pork, cattle flesh as beef, and baby cow flesh as veal, among others, further detaches us from having to think about the animals whose bodies we are purchasing and consuming. Imagine if supermarkets called their meat sections dead animal aisles, or if instead of bacon we bought sliced pig flesh, and on the packaging it explained the process of how they were gassed to death. By turning animals into objects, classifying them differently, and using different words to describe them when they are living and when they are dead, it helps us to avoid the discomfort of thinking of them in gas chambers, or hung up on the kill line about to have their throats cut. Acknowledging our imperfections. But, of course, there's more to the psychology of animal product consumption than our attempt to otherize animals and diminish their experiences. As humans, we are capable of truly remarkable things. However, despite our intelligence, we are susceptible to cognitive biases and imperfections and vulnerabilities in our thinking that can get in the way of rational or objective decision-making. One of the most prevalent is confirmation bias, where our brains view information that agrees with our preconceptions as being more important than information that contradicts them. The information we are first taught is fundamental to how we perceive the world as we develop, and is very difficult to dislodge, even when there is good evidence that it is wrong. Confirmation bias also means that we are more likely to look for information and read articles or resources that agree with our pre-existing beliefs or opinions, which is why a negative article about veganism can go viral, and every vegan hears about it from their meat-eating friends. But a piece of research supporting veganism doesn't get the same kind of reaction. There's also false consensus bias, whereby we believe that something must be acceptable because the majority of people do it. However, there have been many examples throughout history where something was socially accepted and the majority of people were active participants at that time, but the practice was later rejected. It's understandable that we find comfort in being a part of the crowd. First, because it makes us feel like we are sharing the burden of responsibility, and any moral issues are diffused as a result of the action being collective rather than individualistic. In essence, we are relinquishing part of our agency in return for the peace of mind that comes with surrendering part of our responsibility. And second, the perceived comfort of being a part of the collective also comes from a more deeply entrenched fear of being ostracized. We have always been social animals, reliant on the safety of being part of the tribe or community. Indeed, our very survival has, throughout most of our history, been dependent on being part of a collective. So, when we do something that goes against the group and defies the values of the majority, we are, in effect, ostracizing ourselves from the community. Psychologically speaking, this is a terrifying prospect, as we view ostracization as not only being negative, but potentially catastrophic. This is why one of the most important aspects of the growth and normalization of veganism is that as more people go vegan, it becomes viewed as less of a fringe belief, and the fear of being detached from the collective will be removed. To illustrate this point, one of the earliest pieces of research on social conformity conducted in the 1950s was the ASH experiment, in which groups of up to 8 participants were shown a card with a line on it. This was then followed by another card that had 3 lines labeled A, B, and C. The participants then had to state out loud which of the 3 lines was the same as the one on the original card. To begin with, everyone in the group selected the correct lines. However, only one member of the group was actually being studied. The other members were all working with the researchers. As the test progressed, those who were involved in the research began to select the wrong answer on purpose, with 12 of the total 18 questions being answered incorrectly. The person who was being studied was positioned so that they would always either answer last or second to last, meaning they had plenty of time to think about the correct line, but could also potentially be impacted by the answers of the others in the room. The research found that only 24% of participants didn't conform on any question, with 75% conforming at least once and 5% conforming on every single question. In the control group, where there was no external pressure, only one subject gave a wrong answer. As humans, we also have a proclivity for maintaining the status quo, which is another cognitive bias that can make us apprehensive of change and lead to us making decisions that ensure things stay mostly the same. We are also habitual in our decision-making. This makes the prospect of changing how we eat and live challenging, because it requires us to create new habits, which can be daunting. This is why we often find it easier to bury our heads in the sand, sometimes referred to as the ostrich effect, a cognitive bias that can cause us to avoid things that we perceive as being unpleasant or challenging. A good example of this is that many people will decline to watch footage from a slaughterhouse, saying something like, "I don't want to watch that, it will put me off my food." This is an interesting statement. After all, If we can't watch it with our own eyes, why is it acceptable for us to pay for it to happen? The reluctance to watch unpleasant footage surely defies the idea that what happens to animals is humane. If it were, surely it wouldn't be a problem for us to watch it in the first place. We often spare little time to think of the reasons why we do what we do. We simply do it because we always have. Those around us are doing it, and we like it. But if we had to come face to face with the animals who are suffering on our behalf, and press the button that lowered them into the gas chamber, or pull the blade across their throat, perhaps we would think more about the consequences of our actions. As consumers, we like to believe that we are exercising our free will and making our own personal choices when we buy the foods that we do. But does buying products that increase suffering really align with how we want the world to look? If our desire is for animals not to suffer, if we would actively intervene if a dog or a pig was being killed in front of us, if we root for an animal when they escape slaughter, if we would save a piglet from a burning fire, if we say we are against animal cruelty, then by buying animal products we are not living by our own preferences or in alignment with our own values. We are doing the opposite. Our will is being manipulated to make us go against our intrinsic values. So perhaps it's time to turn our dissonance into harmony, something that is only possible once we recognize how our decision-making is being influenced. Hindsight is good, foresight is better. By acknowledging and understanding the psychological barriers that impact the choices we make, we can then critically reflect on our motivations for doing what we do. Without realizing it, the consumption of animal products, which appears to be a surface-level and instinctual decision, is actually determined by an extensive amount of social and psychological rationales. It is also a decision that we spare very little time actively thinking about, even though it has such a huge impact. I know from conversations I have had with other vegans that the biggest regret many of us feel is that we didn't go vegan sooner. I've seen people become really upset as they've admitted that they knew all the reasons they should become vegan, but didn't because they kept trying to find a reason not to, or expressed remorse that they were vegetarian for years but didn't take that extra step because they loved cheese too much. Although hindsight makes it easy to regret such things, the reality is that making the change means confronting the barriers that can make it seem more comfortable and convenient to simply not worry about the issue of animal exploitation. However, we do have the foresight to know what will happen if we continue to exploit animals. This is why it is important to be conscious consumers. As our decision to perpetuate animal exploitation relies on us either being unconscious in our decision-making or willfully ignoring the facts. But although the initial change can seem daunting, uncomfortable, and inconvenient, the consequences of refusing to reflect on our actions and change accordingly will inevitably be much worse. So that was the end of Chapter 7 on psychology. So I'm going to join the voice chat and we can discuss it for a few minutes, and then we're going to do Chapter 8, which is on media. Alright. So what do people think about that quick chapter on psychology?
Hello.
Hello?
Hello.
What did you think about the chapter?
I wasn't there for all of it. I jumped in here and there a little bit. I heard the part when you were explaining like what would you do if you saw a dog being like killed on a street,
Yeah.
and if it was a pig, and like would you have like the same feeling for it if it was a pig or a dog? and all that stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, I heard a little bit of that. That was good.
yeah. I think it's good always comparing it to the dog meat trade in other countries.
Yeah, because everyone's like everyone in my so everyone in my adolescence group, they're all like they're like in China they eat dogs, and then I'm just like, well, we eat pigs.
Yeah,
What's the difference?
yeah. I think another good question is, um, he said at the end, like, it doesn't align with your values, and you know, there's all these
Mm-hmm.
disconnections and stuff. I think one interesting question
Yeah.
is, if you had to build a food system from scratch, would you build this one? Um, I think that's a useful thought experiment that gets away from status quo bias. Um, and then that can help them see, like, oh, what we're doing actually is like really horrific and it's totally ridiculous. Like, it's so
Yeah,
wasteful and toxic and all of this.
I went vegan because I watched this documentary called Dominion. You probably have heard of it, have you?
Yeah,
Yeah, a lot of vegans have watched that. That was how that what I just watched it, and then that's why I went vegan.
yeah. Um, yeah, a lot of people actively avoid information like that. There was some study that was
Yeah,
like, people who are attached to meat actively avoid any information about the intelligence of farmed animals, their emotions, or
yeah,
what they go through.
yeah, my mom's friend does that.
Yeah,
Like I so they came over and they're very well. They're nice to me, but and then on the other side there's also and then they watched and then I'm like, oh wait, do you want can you watch Dominion? And then they're like, no, I'm still gonna eat meat, and they did not watch it, sadly. I know a lot of people that will try to avoid that. I have.
yeah. I think the if they refuse to watch, ask them. Well, don't you think it's weird that you you would be stressed out watching where your food comes from? Like, you can pry a little, but try to do open questions and all that kind of stuff. That they reflect on it, because that the reflection shouldn't stop at, no, I'm not going to watch it. I mean, that is just as much cause for reflection, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. When I was in grade 11 or 12, my English teacher showed me factory farm footage, like, to the class, and I laughed at it
Oh,
because,
she did.
yeah, um, I laughed at it because it made me, in hindsight, it made me incredibly uncomfortable. I didn't want to think about, you know, who I was eating and how they were suffering. So I just laughed at it. I thought, stupid chicken or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
because I was incredibly immature. And but a couple of years later, I was mature enough to actually reflect on the significance of, what we're doing to animals.
Yeah.
All right.
Did you go? Wait, did you go vegan because of climate or health or animals?
Animals.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back into the channel and read chapter 8. It's a similar length. It should take us about 40 minutes, which is on media.
Okay, I'll
Yeah,
listen to that while I do my chores.
awesome.